The scream came just seconds after the lights went out. David Hunter stood frozen at the doorway of the Grand Master bedroom, still dressed in his tailored wedding suit, heart pounding like a war drum. Somewhere behind the thick velvet curtains, a woman sobbed. "No," whimpered. He hadn't expected this. Not tonight. Not from her. The plan had been carefully laid out: marry the maid, the girl no one in his circle would even make eye contact with, and punish her for what her family had done. That was the deal. Quick, clean revenge wrapped in a fake romance. But tonight, something shifted. The house, once his fortress, now pulsed with secrets. Lightning cracked outside the window, illuminating the room in sharp flashes. Shadows danced across the antique furniture, making everything feel unfamiliar, sinister. The chandelier above him swayed slightly, creaking, almost as if the house itself was alive and listening. He stepped forward, heart still racing. "Elena," he called out. No answer. He scanned the room. The bridal bouquet lay crushed on the floor, petals torn. Her heels, gone. The vanity chair had fallen on its side. And in the large mirror that faced the bed, he could still see the outline of that shadow he'd seen seconds ago. A figure. Just standing there. Elena, if this is some kind of game, it's not funny. But deep down, he knew this wasn't a game. He could feel it in his bones. That scream wasn't staged. That fear wasn't acted. He took a deep breath and walked toward the mirror. But when he got there, there was no one. Just his own reflection. And yet, the air was colder now. Thick, heavy. Suddenly, from the corner of the room, a voice, soft, broken. "You don't know the truth, David, none of you ever did." He turned sharply. There she was. Elena. Sitting on the floor, back against the wall, eyes swollen with tears and fear. Her wedding dress was torn at the hem, her veil nowhere to be seen. Her hands were trembling. David rushed to her. "What happened?" "Who screamed?" She looked up at him with a strange mix of fear and something else, pity. "It was me," she whispered. He stared. "You? Why?" She hesitated, then looked toward the window. The storm raged louder, and somewhere in the distance, the howl of a dog echoed through the night. "I saw her," she said. David's brow furrowed. "Who?" She didn't answer. "Elena, who did you see?" She looked back at him, her face pale. "Your mother." David blinked. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking. I saw her. In the mirror. Just behind you." "That's impossible," he said quietly. "My mother died 17 years ago." "I know." There was silence. Thick. Suffocating. He stood up, walking away from her, trying to calm the rising tide of confusion and anger inside him. This wasn't part of the plan. None of this was. "You're trying to mess with me," he muttered. "I knew you'd try something." But she didn't respond. Instead, she stood too, slowly, cautiously. She walked to the nightstand. Pulled open a drawer, and retrieved something wrapped in cloth. She placed it gently on the bed and unwrapped it. A photo. Old. Torn. David's eyes narrowed. It was a picture of a little girl. Standing in front of this very house. With his mother. His heart skipped. "What is this?" he asked, voice suddenly hoarse. "I was here before," she whispered. "Years ago. Before I was ever your maid. Before your father chased us out." "What the hell are you talking about?" Elena's lips trembled. "I'm your sister, David." Silence fell like a hammer. David stared at her, unable to speak. His mind reeled. 1,000 memories rushed through him, none of which could make sense of what she'd just said. "That's not possible," he finally said. "I don't have a sister." She nodded. "You don't remember." "But I do." Outside, thunder cracked again, louder this time, shaking the windows. "I was 5. My mother worked here. Your father, he used her. Abandoned her. My mother begged him to help when I got sick. He refused. Said we were a mistake." David's face was pale now, all blood drained. "That can't be true." Elena looked at him with sorrow. "She died the same year your mother did. And I was sent to live in foster care." He staggered backward, leaning against the wall. "I took this job because I wanted answers," she continued. "But when I saw you, I realized you didn't know." He looked at the photo again. The resemblance. The truth hidden in plain sight. "You married me," she said softly, "to destroy me." David felt sick. "I just wanted to find out the truth," she added. "But now that I have, I want nothing from you." She turned to walk away. "Elena," he called after her, his voice breaking. "Wait." But she didn't turn back. She stepped out of the room, leaving him alone with a storm outside, and something darker inside. The lights flickered once, then died completely. And in the mirror, where Elena once said she saw his mother, he saw it too. A pale face. Smiling. Watching. David stood there, alone in the dimly lit room, the silence pressing against him like a physical weight. His breath came in shallow, uneven gasps as he tried to process what Elena had just revealed. "Your sister." The words echoed in his mind like a distant drumbeat. Impossible. It couldn't be true. He had no sister, no family member who had been hidden away. His mother had died when he was a child, and his father had always been a strict, unforgiving man. There had never been anyone else. But the photo. That old, faded photograph she had shown him, there was a familiar face in it. A little girl with wide eyes and a hesitant smile. David's heart ached with something he couldn't name as he looked at the picture again. And then there was the mirror. The reflection. His mind couldn't settle on what he had seen. He tried to shake it off, dismiss it as some trick of the light, but deep down, something gnawed at him, tugging at his chest, pulling him toward a truth he was terrified to uncover. The lights flickered once, then died completely. And in the mirror, where Elena once said she saw his mother, he saw it too. A pale face. Smiling. Watching. David stood there, alone in the dimly lit room, the silence pressing against him like a physical weight. His breath came in shallow, uneven gasps as he tried to process what Elena had just revealed. "Your sister." The words echoed in his mind like a distant drumbeat. Impossible. It couldn't be true. He had no sister, no family member who had been hidden away. His mother had died when he was a child, and his father had always been a strict, unforgiving man. There had never been anyone else. But the photo. That old, faded photograph she had shown him, there was a familiar face in it. A little girl with wide eyes and a hesitant smile. David's heart ached with something he couldn't name as he looked at the picture again. And then there was the mirror. The reflection. His mind couldn't settle on what he had seen. He tried to shake it off, dismiss it as some trick of the light, but deep down, something gnawed at him, tugging at his chest, pulling him toward a truth he was terrified to uncover. The lights flickered once more before plunging the room into total darkness. His hands gripped the edge of the vanity as he forced himself to steady his thoughts. He had to think. Elena's confession had shaken him, but he couldn't let his emotions cloud his judgment. He needed to get to the bottom of this. But how? His thoughts turned to the phone in his pocket. He reached for it, hoping for a signal. The screen remained dark. Not a single bar. His frustration mounted as he realized that the storm outside had knocked out the power and communication. He was alone, trapped in this mansion with only questions and no answers. His mind drifted back to the night of the wedding. The plan had been so simple, so calculated. He had married Elena to exact revenge on her family, to destroy her, to take back what they had taken from him. But now, this. Everything had changed in an instant. He thought of his father, the man who had built the Hunter legacy from the ground up. His father had always preached about power, wealth, and control, values that had shaped David's life. His father had never shown weakness, never allowed anyone to see the cracks beneath his polished exterior. David had always respected that. But now, as he stood there in the darkness, he wondered if his father had known about Elena all along. Had he known she was alive? Had he hidden her from David for a reason? And what did this all mean for his mother? The one person who had always been his foundation, the woman who had given him love and stability after his father's coldness. He had never questioned her death, until now. David's pulse quickened as a new realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. Had his father been involved in something darker than he had ever imagined? His thoughts were interrupted by a noise. Faint, almost imperceptible. A door creaking open. He wasn't alone. David turned quickly, his eyes scanning the room, trying to adjust to the lack of light. His heart thudded in his chest as his senses heightened. He had the distinct feeling that someone was watching him again. Elena? His voice was hoarse, betraying the fear he couldn't suppress. No response. Another creak. This time, closer. David's instincts kicked in. He moved swiftly toward the door, ready to confront whoever was there. But before he could reach it, he heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the hallway. The footsteps stopped outside the door. David's hand froze on the doorknob. Whoever it was, they were waiting for him to make a move. With his breath held, he stepped back, pressing his back to the wall. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of the situation. If it was Elena, why wasn't she speaking? And if it wasn't, then who? Suddenly, the door handle turned. David's hand shot out, blocking the door from opening completely. He braced himself against it, but the pressure from the other side was intense. Whoever was on the other side was pushing back, trying to get in. "Who is it?" David demanded, his voice low but firm. No answer. A beat of silence. Then, the door gave way. The figure in the doorway was a shadow, their outline barely visible in the dim light. David's eyes narrowed as he tried to make out their features. It wasn't Elena. It wasn't anyone he recognized. The person stepped forward, revealing themselves in the faint glow of the storm outside. It was a man, tall, unshaven, and dressed in a dark suit that seemed out of place in the setting. His eyes were cold, calculating. David's pulse spiked. "Who the hell are you?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step closer, his presence filling the room like a heavy weight. "My name is Michael," the man said, his voice low and calm. "And I think we need to talk." David took a step back, his mind racing. Michael? Who was this man? What was he doing here? "Why are you here?" David asked, his voice steady, though his mind was on edge. Michael didn't seem to care about answering that question. Instead, he studied David closely, his eyes scanning him with an almost clinical precision. "I know what you're after," Michael said, his gaze narrowing. "But you need to understand something. You're not in control here. Not anymore." David's heart skipped. "What do you mean by that?" Michael's expression darkened. "I've been watching you, David. You've been playing a dangerous game, thinking you can control everything. But there are forces at work here that you don't understand. And Elena," he paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. "She's just the beginning." David felt a chill run down his spine. What the hell are you talking about? Michael leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper now. Your family's secrets run deeper than you think. The truth you're searching for is buried, and I'm the only one who can help you uncover it. David's mind reeled. Help me? Why would you help me? Michael smiled, but it wasn't a comforting smile. It was a smile full of secrets and something far darker. Because, David, you're not the only one looking for answers. David stood in the dimly lit room, his heart hammering in his chest. Michael's words echoed in his mind. You're not the only one looking for answers. He had never felt more vulnerable. The man standing before him, a stranger, was speaking as though he knew everything about David's life, his family, and the web of lies that had been spun around him. It was a game he hadn't signed up for, and yet here he was, trapped in the center of it, with no way out. David's eyes flickered toward the door, but Michael stood in his way, blocking the exit. I don't know who you are or what you want, David said, his voice steady but laced with anger. But I'm done with these games. I want answers. Now. Michael smiled, a cold, calculating smile that made the hairs on the back of David's neck stand up. You'll get them. But not in the way you think. David clenched his fists, frustration building. Enough with the cryptic nonsense. Tell me what you know about Elena. What is she really to me? Michael took a step forward, his eyes gleaming with something David couldn't quite place. Elena is more than just your sister, David. She's a key to something far bigger. Something your father never wanted you to discover. David's breath hitched. The mention of his father made his stomach twist. What are you talking about? My father was a man of business. He had no time for anything else. Michael shook his head slowly. That's what you've been led to believe. But your father's empire wasn't just built on wealth and power. It was built on secrets. Dark ones. Ones that tie you, Elena, and this entire mansion together. David felt the room close in on him. He stumbled back a step, his mind racing. The walls, once symbols of safety and control, now seemed suffocating. Everything he had known was unraveling. What secrets? David asked, his voice quieter this time, a mixture of curiosity and fear creeping into his tone. Michael's smile deepened. Let's start with this mansion. This place wasn't always what it appears to be. Your family, they didn't just buy it. They took it. From someone who wasn't supposed to lose it. David frowned. I don't understand. My father always told me this house was built from the ground up by our ancestors. Michael's eyes darkened. Lies. The land this mansion sits on, it belonged to another family. One that your father, in his pursuit of wealth and power, destroyed. And Elena's family, they were the ones who lost it all. That's how she ended up here, as your maid. David's mind spun. The walls of the mansion seemed to close in tighter, each word Michael spoke piercing through him like shards of glass. My father, David murmured, almost to himself. He never told me any of this. He never spoke of any of this. Of course he didn't, Michael said, his voice cold and matter-of-fact. He kept you in the dark for a reason. He needed you to believe in the family legacy, the one he built with his own hands. But the truth is, that legacy was built on the backs of people like Elena's family. David's thoughts whirled. He had spent his entire life idolizing his father, seeing him as the epitome of success. But now, everything was beginning to feel like a lie. The mansion, the family fortune, everything he had ever been taught to believe, it was all crumbling in front of him. Michael seemed to sense his inner turmoil. Your father wasn't just a businessman, David. He was a man who used people. Exploited them. Destroyed lives for profit. And Elena's family was just one of his many victims. David's hands tightened into fists. He had always suspected that there were dark aspects to his father's business dealings, but he had never imagined that they were this deep. The betrayal stung like a raw wound. "Why are you telling me this?" David asked, his voice low, his mind still reeling from the revelations. "What do you want from me?" Michael stepped closer, his gaze piercing. "I'm here because you need to know the truth. But I can't give it to you all at once. You have to be ready. Ready to face what your father did, and what it means for you now." David shook his head, his emotions a swirling mess of anger, confusion, and fear. "I don't need your help. I can handle this on my own." Michael's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. "You can't handle this alone, David. The truth is too big. Too dangerous. And there are others who will stop at nothing to keep it buried." David felt a chill run through him. "What others?" Michael's eyes darkened. "People who have been watching you. People who have been watching Elena. You think your father was the only one with power in this family? Think again." David took a step back, his mind racing with the possibilities. There were people watching Elena? People who knew the truth? "I don't understand," David said, his voice shaking with frustration. "Why didn't Elena tell me any of this?" Michael's gaze softened, but his answer was blunt. "Because she didn't trust you. Not after what you did. Not after you used her to get revenge." David recoiled, as if slapped. He had known his actions had hurt Elena, but hearing Michael's words made him realize just how deep his betrayal ran. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," David muttered, his voice breaking. "I didn't know." "You never knew," Michael said quietly. "And that's the problem. You've spent your whole life believing you were in control. But you weren't. You were just a pawn in a much bigger game." David felt the weight of the truth crashing down on him. Everything he thought he knew about his life, his family, his legacy, his relationship with Elena, was built on lies. "Is there anything left for me to do?" David asked, his voice filled with desperation. Michael's expression darkened once more. "There's always a way out. But you have to be willing to face the truth, no matter what it costs." David's stomach churned. He didn't know what to believe anymore. His entire world had just been shattered, and he didn't know if he could ever put the pieces back together. But one thing was clear, this wasn't just about Elena anymore. It was about his father's legacy. It was about the darkness hidden beneath the surface. And it was about discovering the truth, no matter the cost. The storm outside continued its relentless assault on the mansion, the wind howling like a wild animal and the rain slamming against the windows. David stood frozen in the middle of the room, his mind racing at a speed he couldn't control. Michael's words still echoed in his ears. "You were just a pawn in a much bigger game." David felt like he was suffocating. He had come here, to this house, for one reason only, revenge. But now, everything had changed. The walls of his carefully constructed world had come crashing down, revealing the rotten foundations beneath. His father, the man he had admired his whole life, had been hiding something far darker than David could have ever imagined. And Elena, the woman he had married for payback, wasn't just a pawn either, she was part of a much bigger picture. The man standing in front of him, Michael, had made it clear, David was in over his head. And even though David had always prided himself on being in control, he now felt like he was being dragged into a world he didn't understand. Michael stepped closer, his footsteps soft but purposeful. David's pulse quickened, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. The air seemed charged with electricity, every word spoken a step deeper into a maze of deception and danger. "You can't keep running from the truth, David," Michael said, his voice low but forceful. "You have to face what your father did." David clenched his fists, his nails biting into his palms. His father had built an empire that David had always believed was rooted in hard work and business acumen. But now, every stone of that empire felt like it had been built on lies. How had he not seen this? How had he been so blind? What did my father do? David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Michael's gaze turned colder, and for a moment, it seemed as though he was deciding whether or not to share more. Finally, he spoke. Your father didn't just build this mansion. He destroyed families. Elena's family was one of the first. Michael's words were sharp, each one cutting through David like a blade. Your father took everything from them. Their land, their wealth, their lives. And when they tried to fight back, well, your father did what he always did. He silenced them. David's stomach twisted. His mind struggled to comprehend what he was hearing. His father, the man who had always been an icon of strength and authority, had been a monster. A tyrant who had manipulated and crushed people beneath his boot. Elena's family was wealthy once. They owned land, this land, Michael continued. But your father saw an opportunity. He didn't just take their wealth, he took their daughter. Elena's mother tried to protect her, but your father made sure she was never seen again. He made sure Elena would be forgotten. David felt as though the ground beneath him was slipping away. His head spun, trying to grasp the enormity of the revelation. You're telling me my father had something to do with Elena's mother's disappearance? Michael nodded, his eyes dark with a mixture of anger and regret. Elena's mother was a threat to him. She wasn't going to let him destroy her family's legacy. So, your father took care of her. And Elena, well, she was just a child. But your father didn't care. He erased her from the family history. She became just another part of the collateral damage in his quest for power. David staggered back, his mind spinning. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a destruction of everything he had ever believed about his family. The Hunter legacy wasn't one of hard work and perseverance, it was one of manipulation, violence, and ruthlessness. How could I not have known? David's voice cracked as the weight of the truth settled on his shoulders. How could I have been so blind? Michael didn't answer right away. He just stared at David, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke again, his tone quieter, almost sad. Because your father kept you in the dark. He made sure you were raised to believe in a version of the world that suited him. He gave you the power, the wealth, the control, everything you wanted. But all of it came at a cost. David swallowed hard, his throat tight. The anger inside him flared, but it was mixed with something else, something colder, more dangerous. Betrayal. His entire life had been a lie. And now, the person he had married, Elena, the woman he had tried to destroy for revenge, was tied to this mess. To his family's sins. Elena doesn't know everything, does she? David asked, his voice quieter now. Michael shook his head. She knows a lot, but not all of it. She's been running from the truth just like you. But if you want answers, you'll need to find her. She's the only one who can help you understand the full picture. She's the only one who can tell you what happened to her mother, and why your father went to such extreme lengths to bury the truth. David's heart pounded in his chest. He had thought he was the one who was in control, the one who held all the cards. But now, he realized how wrong he had been. Elena wasn't just a victim. She was a key. A key to unraveling the truth, to understanding the full scope of what had happened to her family, and to his. But the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. Michael had warned him about the forces that had been watching Elena. Forces that didn't want the truth to come out. Where is she? David asked, his voice urgent. Michael didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step back, his eyes narrowing. She's close, Michael said. But there are people who will stop at nothing to keep you from finding her. You need to be careful, David. There are more enemies in your life than you realize. David's fists clenched. His mind was racing with the implications of what Michael had just said. Enemies? Who were these people? Who else was involved in this conspiracy? You'll find Elena, Michael said, his tone more solemn now. But you need to make a choice. You can keep living in the past, pretending everything is fine, or you can face the truth. It won't be easy, but it will be the only way to take back control of your life. David didn't hesitate. He had already lost everything he thought he knew about himself and his family. There was no turning back now. I'll find her, David said, his voice filled with determination. And I'll uncover the truth, no matter what it takes. Michael nodded. Good. But remember this, you're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for Elena too. And if you want to make things right, you need to make amends. You can't undo the past, but you can make sure the future is different. David stood there in the silence, the storm raging outside and the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He had a choice to make, and it was clear that the road ahead would be perilous. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of clarity. He would find Elena. He would uncover the truth. And he would face the consequences of his actions. Whatever it took. David's mind raced as he left the study, each step echoing through the mansion's grand corridors. The weight of the revelations from Michael hung heavily on him. His life, the life he had built on his father's teachings and legacy, had just been reduced to rubble. And Elena, his maid, the woman he had married for revenge, was now the focal point of this entire dark saga. The storm outside continued its violent tantrum, a fitting backdrop for the chaos inside David's head. The mansion, once a symbol of power and privilege, now felt like a prison, each room more oppressive than the last. David knew he needed to find Elena. But where was she? Michael had told him that she was close, but what did that even mean? He felt like he was on the edge of a cliff, the winds of uncertainty blowing harder with each passing moment. Every step forward seemed to push him deeper into a labyrinth of lies, betrayal, and secrets. But he couldn't stop now. He had come too far. The truth had already cost him everything. He wasn't about to back down now. As he made his way to the hallway that led to Elena's room, David's thoughts turned inward. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That something had changed between him and Elena, and not just because of the truth about their families. There was a distance now. A silence that had never been there before. He knocked on her door, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for the brass handle. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. His heart was racing. Elena. David called out, his voice filled with a desperation he couldn't mask. Still, there was no response. David's frustration flared. He tried the door, and to his surprise, it opened. He stepped into the room, and the first thing that hit him was the stark emptiness. The bed was made, the curtains drawn tight, and yet there was an eerie stillness in the air. Elena? David called out softly, his voice betraying the anxiety clawing at his chest. He stepped further into the room, searching every corner. But she was nowhere to be found. His eyes fell to the desk by the window, where a stack of papers sat. Without thinking, he walked over and picked them up. It was a collection of old photographs he didn't recognize. A woman, her face obscured by a shadow, standing next to a young Elena. And in the background, a tall figure, his face hidden, but his posture one of authority. David's breath caught in his throat. The photo was too familiar. It looked like his father. David turned the photo over, his fingers trembling as he read the words scrawled on the back. For Elena. You'll always be my daughter, no matter the world that separates us. Helena. His pulse quickened. He had heard that name before. Helena. It was Elena's mother, the woman who had vanished years ago. The woman his father had erased from the history of the family. The woman whose disappearance David had never questioned. A sense of dread washed over him. This was the connection. The truth that had been buried for so long. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps behind him made him whirl around. Elena stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. David held up the photograph. "What is this? Why didn't you tell me about this before?" Elena's gaze flickered down to the photo, then back to David. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of sorrow and something darker, something that David couldn't quite place. "I didn't want you to know," she whispered, her voice soft but firm. "I didn't want you to hate your father even more than you already do." David's mind raced. "This is about my father, isn't it? You never told me the truth because you were trying to protect me from the reality of who he really was. But this is about your mother. My father did something to her, didn't he? He erased her from history. He made her disappear." Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I wasn't trying to protect you, David. I was trying to protect myself. I've spent my whole life hiding from the truth. And I thought, if I could just stay in the background. Just be the maid, I could pretend none of this was happening. But I was wrong. You have to know the truth now. For both of us." David stepped closer to her, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. "What happened to your mother, Elena?" She looked down at the ground, her hands wringing together as though she could somehow squeeze the pain from her chest. "My mother was a powerful woman. A businesswoman in her own right. She didn't just inherit wealth, she earned it. She built her empire the same way your father did. She was strong. But she was also a threat." David's mind was reeling. "A threat? To what?" "To your father's plans," Elena replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "He needed her out of the way. He didn't just want her fortune. He wanted her connections, her influence, and her land. He wanted to destroy everything she stood for and make sure her family's legacy was wiped off the map." David felt a chill run through him. This wasn't just about power. It was about a war of legacies. Two families, once equal in power and ambition, now locked in a battle for control. His father had orchestrated Elena's mother's destruction to ensure that his own family would come out on top. Elena's eyes met David's, and in them, he saw a depth of pain he had never fully understood before. "My mother knew what your father was capable of. She tried to fight him. She tried to protect me. But in the end, he took everything. My mother, my family, my heritage. All of it." David's breath caught in his throat. "And he made you disappear too." Elena nodded slowly. "He erased me. And he made sure I would never find out the truth. He made sure I would never find my way back to who I really am." David took a step back, processing her words. His father had done this. He had destroyed Elena's family, had taken everything from them, and now he had forced Elena into a life of obscurity, a life where she was nothing more than a maid in his mansion. A pawn in his game of control. "I'm so sorry, Elena," David whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "I had no idea. I thought you were just a victim of circumstance. But you were never just that. You were part of a much bigger story, a story that was hidden from both of us." Elena wiped the tears from her eyes, her gaze steady. "It's not your fault, David. You didn't know. But now that you do, you have a choice. We both do. We can either continue living in the shadows, pretending this never happened, or we can fight for the truth." David looked at Elena, his heart heavy but resolute. He had spent his life chasing power, revenge, and wealth. But now, the only thing that mattered was redemption. For both of them. "I don't know what we're up against," David said, his voice determined. "But I promise you, Elena, I won't stop until we get the truth. And I won't let anyone take what's rightfully yours ever again." Elena nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and newfound strength. For the first time in their twisted journey, they weren't just enemies, they were allies. And together, they would uncover the truth that had been buried for so long. But David knew that the battle was far from over. The storm outside raged louder, as if to remind him of the forces that were still out there, watching, waiting. This was just the beginning. The days following their confrontation were tense, filled with both a sense of urgency and an air of impending doom. Elena and David were no longer just two people caught in a web of lies and deceit, they were now bound by a shared mission, a mission that seemed to grow darker and more dangerous with each passing moment. David had always been a man who thrived on control. The world had bent to his will, his family's legacy and wealth giving him power over everyone. But now, as he and Elena stood on the precipice of a truth that could destroy everything he had ever known, the realization hit him hard: this was no longer about revenge. This was about survival. Theirs. The storm had not relented, and it mirrored the chaos inside David's mind. The mansion, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage. And outside, the world was changing. The stakes had escalated, and David knew that they were up against forces that would stop at nothing to keep the truth buried. "Elena," David said, his voice low and filled with determination, "we need to find out where my father hid the records. There's something he's keeping from both of us. Something that could end this for good." Elena, standing by the window, her gaze focused on the storm outside, turned to face him. Her eyes were filled with an unsettling calm, the kind of calm that comes when you've already seen too much, when you've already been to the edge and back. "I know," she said, her voice steady. "But we have to be careful. There are people out there who want us to fail. People who will do anything to stop us from uncovering what your father did." David nodded. He had heard whispers from Michael and others about the reach of his father's influence. The wealth and power that had built the Hunter empire weren't just based on business acumen, they were built on manipulation, coercion, and a network of people willing to do anything to protect their secrets. "You're right," David replied. "But we don't have a choice. We have to expose him, no matter the cost." It was a decision that had been weighing on him ever since Michael had opened his eyes to the true nature of his father's empire. At first, David had only wanted to destroy the man who had wronged him, the man who had built his success on cruelty and deception. But now, the desire for vengeance had been replaced by something far more urgent: justice. For Elena, for her family, and for the countless others who had been victimized by his father's greed. The first step in their plan was to locate the vault. The vault that held all the documents, the financial records, contracts, the names of everyone who had been manipulated or destroyed. David's father had hidden it well, but Elena had an idea of where it might be. A place she had seen as a child but had been forbidden to enter. David and Elena moved in silence, both of them knowing that this could be the last chance to expose the truth. They entered the mansion's library, a grand room with towering shelves of leather-bound books that smelled of history and wealth. The fireplace was unlit, and the room felt colder than usual. Elena stood still for a moment, scanning the room. Then, her eyes fell on a small painting that hung above a grand wooden desk. It was an old portrait of a man she recognized. Her father, before he had been erased from the world. She reached out and touched the frame, her fingers lingering over the image. "This is it," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. David stepped closer, his heart pounding. "What is it?" Elena carefully removed the painting from the wall, revealing a hidden safe embedded in the stone. A cold sweat ran down David's spine as he realized the significance of the moment. This was it. The thing they had been searching for. The vault. Elena worked quickly, entering the code she had memorized years ago, the code her mother had once whispered to her, telling her that one day, if she ever needed it, this would be the key to her survival. The safe clicked open, and Elena pulled out a set of old, yellowing files. David's breath caught in his throat as he looked at the stack of documents in her hands. These were the records. The secrets. The key to everything. As they spread the files out on the desk, David's mind raced. He saw names he recognized, people who had been part of his father's network, people who had been used, discarded, or erased. But there, in the middle of the stack, was something that stopped David's heart cold. A letter. A letter that had been addressed to his father, written in elegant, looping handwriting. The date on the letter was decades old, and as David read it, his hands trembled. It was from Elena's mother, Helena. The letter was a confession. Helena had known the truth all along. She had known what David's father was capable of, and she had been trying to stop him. But she had failed. And now, she had left this letter as a final warning, hoping that one day, Elena would find it. The words on the letter were damning. Your father is not the man you think he is, David. He has built his empire on the destruction of those who dare to oppose him. He will stop at nothing to control you, to control everything. But there is one thing he cannot control, the truth. David felt the blood drain from his face as he read on. The letter revealed the final, most devastating truth. Elena's mother had discovered that David's father was responsible for orchestrating the deaths of several people. People who had been in his way, people whose only crime had been standing up to him. Elena's mother had been one of the few who had known too much. She had tried to expose the truth, but in the end, she had been silenced. David looked up at Elena, his face pale. This is it, isn't it? This is the truth about everything. My father didn't just destroy your family. He destroyed lives, he killed people. And now we have the proof. Tears welled up in Elena's eyes, but she didn't look away. We've always known this was bigger than us. This isn't just about revenge, David. This is about stopping him from doing this to anyone else. It's about ending the cycle of destruction. David nodded, his resolve hardening. We can't let him get away with this. They both knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. They would have to take these documents to the authorities, to expose his father's crimes. But they also knew that they would be up against a powerful force. A man who had spent decades manipulating and controlling everyone around him. The storm outside intensified as they made their decision. They would no longer hide in the shadows. They would no longer let fear control them. It was time to face the truth, no matter the cost. As they prepared to leave the library, Elena turned to David, her eyes filled with both determination and fear. Do you think we can win? David didn't hesitate. We will. And together, they stepped into the storm.